Story of Watermelon. Once there lived a boy in a village of Para in Goa which was famous for its watermelons. Every year farmers would organize a watermelon eating contest at the end of every harvest season in May. Farmers used to invite kids from all over village to participate in the contest. Farmer would keep best watermelons from harvest for kids to eat at contest. Kids were allowed to eat as many watermelons as they wanted, only condition for them was not to bite into seeds of watermelon and spit out all the seeds into a bowl. Years later, boy went to college. After completing his study, boy came back to his village after 7 years. Boy was very happy to return to his village and went to market looking for watermelons, but there was nothing like before. All was gone. Watermelon that were available in he market were small. Boy came to know that contest was still held, but things were changed now. Whole farming and contest things were now handled by farmer's son. Farmer's son held contest even now, but there was small difference. When farmer's son took over, he realized that larger watermelons would fetch good money in market, so he would sold the larger one in market and kept the smaller ones for the contest. This same thing continued for year after year, and at last best watermelons were finished from the village. What went wrong? How did this change? Previously, when contest was held, best watermelons were kept for kids to eat and seeds collected in bowls would be used for next harvest of watermelon. This way farmers would get best seeds from next year harvest of watermelons. It would yield even bigger watermelon next year. Now when his son took over, he would kept the smaller ones for contest, because of which next year yield watermelon were smaller. The year later even smaller. In watermelon generation was 1 year, but village best watermelons were finished in 7 years. Moral: human generation changes after 25 years, but it will take us 200 years to understand. What's wrong with education system? Today's generation scrap or change older traditions without realizing and understanding deeper value and meaning of those traditions. Change is good, but first we should try to understand why we need to make change. Making most of opportunities. It's story of rich man who had 4 sons. As rich man grew old, he decided to give his property to son who would value his wealth most. So, he called his sons and gave each of them 5 grains of rice and told them that he would ask for these grains at the end of 5 years. At last he said that he will give all his property to son who will value these grains most. First son threw away the grains and decided to show some other grains when father would ask for them. He thought that his father will not be able to guess difference between set of grains. Second son eat them, and like the first son thought of showing other grains when father demands. Third son kept grains in silver box at home and offers prayer to box while praying to God. Fourth son went to his home and saw those grains in his backyard. He cultivate them in backyard, and after they grow harvested them. He kept on re-sowing the grains from this crop, and in 5 years' time period he had a vast plot of land cultivated with rice. After 5 years, when all the son reached home, father gave his property to fourth son as he was the one who valued those grain most. Moral: making most of every opportunity. We should take the very little opportunity, work hard, and let it grow. Most popular profession. One day Akbar thought about professions and wanted to know which profession was most popular in his capital. He asked about this to his courtier. Some said it would be trade, others said soldiering. When it was Birbal's turn, he arose from his seat and bowed before Akbar and said, "Your Majesty, in my opinion it's medicine." This was surprising, as there was just number of physicians in city. Physicians in court got furious and said, "You have no clue about how difficult is it to practice medicine and advise people about medical problems." Birbal smiled and said, "I can prove this to you, my Majesty. if you come with me tomorrow morning." Next morning Akbar met Birbal on major crossroad in the city. Birbal had bandage on one hand. Akbar saw it and asked what happened. Birbal said, "I cut my hand by mistake while cutting some fruits for breakfast." Birbal further requested Akbar, "Your Majesty, you will have to write down the names of all the physicians we came across." Akbar agreed and said, "I will surely do, but firstly be sure to wash that wound and apply ointment on it." They sat at busy crossroad through all day. Birbal was a well-known personality, so anyone who passed by inquired about his injury and advised him some or other medication. As day went on, list grew long. Akbar got tired, so suggested to go home. Birbal asked for list and said, "Majesty, you forget to write your own name on the top of list. You were the first to advise me." Moral: it best to refrain telling advice on matters you are not qualified to handle, and for yourself check credential of those who counsel you in both personal and professional life. Glass of water. Stress. While psychologist was teaching stress management to the class, he raised a glass of water. Seeing this, everyone expected that he is going to ask, "Half empty, half full?" But instead he asked, "How heavy is this glass of water?" Many called out the answer that it ranged from 8 ounces to 20 ounces. Now psychologist replied, "This absolute weight of glass doesn't matter. What matter is how long I hold it. If I hold it for a minute, it's not going to be problem. If I have to hold it for an hour, then I will feel ache in my arm. If I hold it for a day, my arm will feel numb and paralyzed. In all the cases, the weight of glass doesn't change, but longer I hold, heavier it becomes." He continued, "Similar are stress and worries. If you think about them for a while, nothing happens. If you think about them a bit longer, they hurt. And if you think about them all day long, you feel like paralyzed or incapable of doing anything." Moral: it's important to let go off your stresses. Don't carry your burdens and stress into evening and then night. Sand and pebbles in jar. A professor stood before class with items on table in front of him. When class began, he picked up a large glass jar and started to fill it with rocks of about 2 inches in diameter. Then he asked students if the jar was full. All students agreed. Now the professor picked up a box of pebbles and poured them into the jar. He shook the jar slightly, so the pebbles rocked into the empty areas between the rocks. Again he asked students if the jar was full. Again all the students agreed it was. The professor now picked up a box filled with sand and poured into the jar. The sand filled the remaining open areas in the jar. Once again he asked the students if the jar was full. Students respond with yes. Professor said, "Now, I wasn't all of you to recognize this jar as representation of your life. Rocks here represent the important things like your family, friends, health, children. If everything else was lost, jar will still remain full. Pebbles are other things that matter like your job, car, house. And sand represents all other small stuff in life. Now, if you first put sand into jar, then there will be no room for pebbles. Same goes for your life. That means there will be no room left for important things in your life if you spend all your energy on small stuff. Pay attention to the things that are critical to your happiness." Moral: give importance to things that really matters. Set priorities. Rest is just sand.